The number one mistake that chess beginners make is that they study chess openings way too much. And I did this too when I was learning. I watched YouTube video after YouTube video about this chess trap or that chess opening study, but by the time I got to move 4, 5, or 6 in the games, I would either forget what I had prepared or my opponent would play something completely different. At the end of the day, you just need to remember 3 main chess opening principles. Number 1 is to control the center. Number 2 is to develop your pieces. And number 3 is to get your king to safety. I'm going to walk you through those 3 principles, and then I will show you a game where my opponent clearly did not follow those principles. First, what you want to do is control the center. What typically happens is that people put a pawn into the center of the board. Why? Because they want to control as many of these central squares as possible. For example, this pawn controls the d5 and the f5 square. If black doesn't move, then white will place a pawn on d4 and control all these central squares, and it looks very nice. So I'll consider these squares being the priority, and then the second priority being anything in the larger square. That is also why you typically put your knight on f3, your knight on c3, because they will support the center as well. Principle number 2, develop your pieces. So your pieces on the back rank are not active. They don't have many squares to go to. In fact, the only piece that can move at the starting position is the knight, because the knight can jump over the pawns. But after, let's just say e4, e5, knight f3, now the knight, instead of having just these 3 squares to go to, after knight f3, they now can jump to many more squares. Similarly, if your opponent plays knight c6, then your bishop right now can only go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares. But if you place it on c4, you can now go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares. So your bishop is more active than it was on f1. That is the key concept behind development. When your pieces control more squares and they are more active, they have more potential for tactics or for winning combinations. In general, you want to develop your minor pieces first, which are your knight and your bishop, and then you want to worry about your heavier pieces, the queens and the rooks. Last but not least, you need to get your king to safety. That is typically done by castling. So let's just say that pieces are trying to fight for the center, you have to defend, pieces are developing, but at some point you need to think, before everything opens up, I need to castle my king and get it to safety. And when I say open up, I mean that if the central pawns are gone from the board, then it would be very easy to have open lines of attack to attack your king if it was still in the center of the board. Likewise, if you are castled and your opponent is not, then it could be a potential plan to try and break open the center. Now that we've talked about the principles, let's get on to the chess game. So I'm playing against a 1400 rated player in Rapid, and we are playing the Karo Khan. He's attacking my center, I develop my knight, and he takes, I take. He puts his knight out, and I take immediately, basically saying, you have doubled f-pawns, what are you going to do about it? And I'm trying to argue that this is a weakness, and black is trying to argue that that is a strength. It could be either or, right? Black is trying to say, look, I have faster development for both my bishops. I have faster development to put a rook on the e file and hopefully have some sort of attack here. And meanwhile, I'm trying to say, well, this is going to be some sort of long-term weakness. Very unclear. Right now, I just reinforce my center with c3. He develops his bishop, and he moves his bishop twice. In general, you do not want to move the same piece twice in the opening unless you have a good reason to. And maybe he thought that the good reason was to try and threaten the g2 square, because if he takes on g2, then my rook is trapped. But really all I need to do is play knight f3 and everything's blocked. He develops his bishop and I develop mine. He castles, I make a battery. And sure, I'm not castled yet, but I'm making a move with tempo. What does that mean? It means that I am making a threat that my opponent needs to respond to before they can continue developing and improving their position. Because right now, if they just develop their knight, then I would take on h7 and I would win a pawn. So naturally, they play h6 to save their pawn. Now I long castle, and I am noticing that my opponent's king safety might not be something that is very long term. Sure, he is castled and he has all these pawns protecting him, but are there really pieces that are protecting him, or is it just the pawns? Because if you look at it, I have 1, 2, and soon to be 4 pieces going to attack his king, and that's exactly what happens. As he is trying to catch up in development, I am moving my pieces to attack. And what ends up happening is I transfer my queen over, and it looks like a weird move to play queen g4 because I'm walking into a pin, but at the same time, I'm threatening checkmate. So checkmate is a little bit better than threatening material, right? He takes, and all of a sudden, after g5, it's looking quite bad. Why? Because when you move your kingside pawns are usually very, very important in defending your king. If you extend them, they can become easier targets to attack. For example, I could have just played h4 immediately, but I played queen h5 first to threaten the h-pawn. After he moved king g7 to protect the h-pawn, now I push h4. And what's the idea of h4? Like I said, you got these kingside pawns. I'm trying to come and break everything open and then ultimately come crashing through with an attack. And you'll notice that all of my pieces are basically partaking in this attack versus all of black's pieces are on the other side of the board and not really doing a good job defending. And look at this pawn on f6. It is actually preventing pieces of black to come and help defend the king. So what ends up happening, they try to bring their knight over, but it's too little too late. After h takes g5, they bring the rook, because if they don't, then, I mean, checkmate is pretty much imminent there. And I found the nice idea, g takes h6. The king moves back, and then I played the top engine move, h7. Why is h7 the top engine move? Well, if you look at it, yes, these doubled f-pawns have been terrible. The king is not safe at all. And when I give a check on h6, actually they are moving to this open file, which means that I can attack. My opponent tries to take my bishop. I'm not even worried. Sure, they're hitting my rook, but I don't need to take back with a pawn. Instead, I play queen h6 check. And like I said, this king is about to get eaten alive. After rook d to e1, I'm going to win that piece back, and I have all these pawns, and this king is completely lost. They try and undo the pin with bishop e7, but then I simply take. They move queen d6, and I play queen g7. At this point, my opponent resigns, but really, this rook is not defended at all, because even if they tried to play rook f8, then I just take it. Why? Because you can't go here. My bishop is doing an amazing job blocking everything. You can't capture because my rook is pinning you, so you have to take, and this is made immediately. So really the best thing you can do as black here is to just run. Run like the wind, because you need to make sure that you don't get checkmated, but that ultimately leads to losing your rook, and then, you know, of course, everything is going to come crashing through at some point. And I can even just play queen g8 here, promote, or bring rook over to the e-file, and it's just catastrophic. So what went wrong here? It was really in the opening, because at the end of the day, black didn't seem to understand what they're doing in the opening. After you play this, you have an open line to your king, so it's double-edged. You have to get out of the center as fast as possible, finish your development, and then begin attacking. So for example, after c3, you develop your dark story bishop first, so you can castle. After white continues developing their pieces, then you can give this check. They develop their pieces, and you have to bring your knight over to the f8 square. A lot of these times, the knight on f8 in this specific opening does wonders to counteract this bishop and queen battery on the light square diagonal. Now that the knight arrives just in time, this king is much, much safer than when it was in the actual game. In the actual game, there were arguably 0 pieces defending the king, and now there's 1 piece defending the king, and also you can at some point transfer over your other pieces. And as long as you don't unnecessarily push these pawns, then you should be a lot safer than my opponent was in the actual game. But this is just an example. Like, putting the knight on f8 is not like a super common thing, but in this opening, you need to know that to survive. So I hope this video has helped you understand that learning and memorizing the first 4 to 6 moves of an opening is not the most important way to improve your chess. It's actually to understand chess principles and to use them in your games, and also to punish your opponent when they don't abide by those principles. If you learned something during this video, then I would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button and the like button, because somehow only 1% of viewers are actually subscribed to my channel. It would mean the world to me if you increase that percentage.